good afternoon in Europe, and I don't know, maybe good night in Asia or somewhere. I want to invite everybody and welcome you to our webinar organized by the Marie Curie Alumni Association of North America on mentoring and a little bit also on supervising. We would like to call it a training, but it's not really a training. It will be a panel and exchange of ideas and experiences. My name is Agnieszka Weinar. I'm the chair of the MSCAA in North America. I'm based in Gatineau, really, which is a part of Ottawa in Canada. I'm Polish, by the way. And our two distinguished guests are Professor Alan Grodzinsky. I'm sorry, I did that the Polish way.
Yes, no, that's perfect.
And who is the professor of biological, electrical, and mechanical engineering, and the director of the Center of Biomedical Engineering at MIT. Welcome. And our second guest, Professor Matthew Collins, who specializes in biomolecular archaeology, and who is a Niels Bohr professor at the University of Copenhagen, and also McDonald professor in, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce it, paleoproteomics at Cambridge University.
Hello, yes, and I'm speaking to you today from Cambridge University.
The other Cambridge.
The other Cambridge, that's right, yes, we're both in Cambridge.
Well, anyways, I hope I will learn how to pronounce this word. It's very long, very complicated. And they say that Polish language is complicated. I don't know. Anyway, so my first question is really a little bit unrelated, but you know, when I was reading your titles, I was wondering, you are both very distinguished researchers and scientists, and at least one is the professor in the field I cannot pronounce. So I was wondering, what were your career goals when you were 10? If you think that you will be in this field, that, you know, it's quite complicated.
Well, I can answer that.
Alan goes first because he's an A. So Alan, you go first.
Okay, thank you. When I was 10 years old, my goal was baseball. And because all the kids in my neighborhood after school would go back to the sandlot, to the school playground and play baseball. And so my goal was to try to understand how to hit a ball with a bat and how to catch a ball with a glove. And that was about all I thought about every day.
Well, I would say that there is a lot of engineering in that as well.
Right.
For me, there was a TV show a long time ago now called Daktari, and this was the story of a vet working in Africa. I just thought, looking after animals, working in Africa, that would be a great job. But I would say that my formative experience was at the age of 14 in 1974, going to watch the movie Jaws, and there you had an exciting movie. And there was one non-action hero who was the nerd, who was the marine biologist on the boat. And I thought, oh, I'm a bit of a nerd, but I could be in exciting places if I became a marine biologist. So that's my formative. And the really thing that changed my life was the decision I wanted to study sharks and become a marine biologist.
Okay, so I guess we are indebted to Mr. Spielberg, then.
Yeah, indeed. For me, yes.
Arts, it changes lives. So fast forwarding now, I mean, I assume that between you being 10 years old or 14 years old until now, you had a long path. And in this path, you were probably supported by many people, as we all are in our lives, right? So I want to ask you, in this leap, has there been a time when you were MNT yourself? And could you tell me about the mentor that really impacted you and why you think that was a great mentor? And I will ask Professor Grodzinsky to come forward first.
Great. And just to make life easy for everyone, please call me Al. A-L.
Oh, it's easy for me.
Yes, that's a very interesting and important question. And I would say the great leap forward for me when I was in my sophomore year in college, second year in college, I met the mentor who would be my mentor throughout my undergraduate and even graduate career, as well as my early days on the faculty. So at MIT, where I still am, there were possibilities for undergraduate students to do research in laboratories. And at the time, I was in the electrical engineering department at MIT. There was no bioengineering at that time, and met a professor who happened to be the mentor of my older brother, who was here at the same time. I went into the lab to help my brother take some data. I had no idea what he was doing and why, but he seemed to be having a good time. And Professor Jim Melcher, James R. Melcher, came in. He was my brother's mentor, and he became my mentor. And what I found to be the most important was to find a person who I thought was a terrific person. Obviously, he must have been brilliant in his field, but it was really his ability to get along with people and to attract interest in the areas of what he was doing. So he became my mentor throughout the rest of my undergraduate career when I was doing research in his lab. And then I asked to join his lab as a graduate student and did my master's and then PhD with him. In those days, engineers did not do postdocs, so one of the few jobs available at that time for me was to just stay right where I was. And I found inertia to be a very important force in my life. So I wound up staying. I've been within about 1,000 yards of the same location since I was a sophomore for the next 54 years. So his being able to mentor me in many ways, most important being a very good person who you could confide in and then seek guidance in professional work was the most important for me.
Thank you. It's very interesting what you said about not moving around, because now it's just so rare.
Yes, yes.
Okay, Professor Collins.
Yeah, so Al and I are very different. I mean, I moved around rather like a drunken goldfish, not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I was very fortunate halfway through a PhD, which I had designed and which was a complete failure. I met a wonderful man, a chap called Peter Westbrook, a professor at the University of Leiden. And he really started talking to me, and he was an interesting man because he had come from geology, but he was interested in biochemistry. And so he actually had moved to spend a year's sabbatical at the university in Belfast, Queen's Belfast, to learn biochemical methods. And he heard about me, and I had this background in marine biology, a background in biochemistry, but I was interested in fossils. And so he just really inspired me because he was a very generous man. And he encouraged me to sort of to continue in my work, and then really to say, just get through your PhD. It's not a great PhD, but if you get through it, then you can come and work in my lab in the Netherlands. And so that was for me the opportunity as somebody who saw in me something which I don't think anyone else had quite seen, and had the generosity to give me the time And one of the things I would say for me that's been important is people that can sort of empathize. And one of the things I found when I arrived in the Netherlands, not speaking Dutch, very out of my depth in his lab, is someone who would spend the time to listen to me and listen to my concerns. And in fact, when he discovered that because I had no money, my Royal Society grant was very small, and I hadn't been eating for sort of a week, he literally stopped in the middle of that day. We were in his office, and they just took me into town and gave me a slap-up meal and said, "You better feed yourself." So somebody who has that kind of time and empathy to talk. And then he then had various connections, and it was from him I sort of developed my career, which has really been to never stay in one place more than a few years, actually 5, 10 years in one place.
So you both were mentioning people who were at the same time supervisors in a way.
Yeah.
What is for you the fundamental difference between a mentor and a supervisor?
Well, I guess I'll start. Supervisors to me help you think about your next move, help you think about what you have been doing in the lab and what it means, more a direct connection to research. Whereas to me, a mentor is more a mentor not only in the science and engineering of what we do around here, but in life, and can recognize when you are thinking about other things in the lab, and more of a broad personal guide in addition to an important supervisor of things that you're doing. So while I've been in the same place for many, many years, the activities I've been pursuing, both in the lab and outside the lab, have been very different over the years. And so the mentor aspect of guiding me in the big shifts, even though I stayed in the same geographic location, was very important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Al. For me, it's somebody who sort of opens up the kind of their intellectual hinterland in a way. So instead of just looking at the scientific problems that you face, which is what a supervisor does, what a mentor does is kind of open you up to the way they are thinking, what is motivating them and interesting them. So for instance, with me, with my mentor, not only introduced me to science, but to opera, to music, to a whole lot of other things, basically who share their intellectual excitement about the world, and is someone who's prepared to sit and to listen to you and to guide you and to not make you feel stupid, but to sort of be aware of your own intellectual limitations and kind of take you forward.
Thank you. So we come to the next questions. The question is, how do you define your own mentoring style? What strategies you use to motivate your mentees? What works, what doesn't work, and with whom?
Yes. Yes, it's both a specific but a very general and personal question. So in a way, I think it combines what we've been discussing to be the superposition of both a supervisor and a mentor. When I first sit down with a new student, and whether the student is an undergraduate or a graduate student or a postdoc, the most important thing that I find is to engage in a conversation and to hear that person out and try to judge what they are thinking about and what they would like to do. And then to establish a means of discussion with this person, of communication. So it's an issue of personal connection in a way. Yes, we're always trying to think about what is next in the lab, what's the next thing, exciting thing that you might do in terms of an experiment. But at the same time, it's very important, I think, as a mentor, to establish an environment in our lab, in our floor, where a person can come in and think about how they can make the next step for themselves. And it's really important to empower the person to believe that they can make the next step and think for themselves, and not just have to rely on a direct supervisor. What should I do next? But no, this is what I think I should do next. What do you think? You think that's okay? So I think that communication in that aspect is really important to empower the person to develop.
Do you use any specific strategies for that? Or you do it in your office? You go for lunch? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yes, for the past 15 years, we've had a great environment in that the first floor of our building is the combination of a cafe, bakery, restaurant, and bar. And depending on the time of day, there's always something that you can do downstairs to go down and have. It's great to get out of the office. You know, the office is a place where you do want to talk details, but let's go downstairs, grab a cup of coffee. I am definitely a caffeine addict, which I readily admit to anybody. But at the end of the day, it's fun to have a beer with a student as well, because that enables you to get past the particulars of an experiment and to think about, as my colleague just said, what's going on in the orchestra across the street from us and what's playing at the movies. So I think being able to establish a relationship is not just what's going on in the office with the books behind me, but thinking about lots of things.
Thank you. Professor Collins.
Yeah, I think Al and I have almost the same answer for this one. I mean, like him, I'm a caffeine addict. My main office is actually the coffee room of my building. So I actually spend very little time in my office. I just sit in the coffee room with my laptop. Because for me, it's really important just to engage and to talk and to share ideas. And I think the word that Al used was empowerment, and I think that is what I feel too. And it's also empowerment in two different ways. I mean, academia is a tough game, and you have to get a sense of whether the people you're supporting are the people for which this is the right game. And the one thing I say to all of my mentees is, remember, I'm a very bad person to advise you because I've never left school. You know, I mean, people like me, essentially, if you're smart at school and you do well, you get encouraged to go on to university, you do well, you're encouraged to do a PhD, etc., etc. So you have a kind of, I have never worked outside a university environment. So I'm a poor person to judge the rest of the world. But what I would say then is the empowerment is one to enable a student to understand their strengths, their opportunities, but that does also mean in some instances to encourage people away from this world, because you realize that it's not the kind of environment which their talents will be best applied.
Actually, can I pick up on this? This is an interesting point. I think that especially nowadays, there is a certain overproduction of PhDs, as we know, right? So the main policy idea, at least, is that a large portion of these people should work outside of academia. And do you help them in any ways? Do you think that people inside of the academia are prepared actually to help people out, and how to do this?
Yeah, that's a very, very important issue that comes up. And I think we all do feel that stress, if you like. What do we do with all of the PhDs that we train? How do we guide them? And in some ways, of course, the locale, the location, what's going on in our environment is very important. So it just so happens over the past 10 years, where we are located in Cambridge, it's an area called Kendall Square. It's just booming right now with activity in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry. Startup companies are coming out every day. And not all students aspire to go down the academic route. Nevertheless, there are incredibly interesting and important contributions that can be made in industry, working in research. Again, I try not to force or suggest, but to first hear what the students' interests are, and they may change over the several years that they're in the lab here. It may be that somebody has dreamt of becoming a professor their entire life, and that's how they start. But after 3 or 4 years, they look around and see how tough it is to try to get a position like that. And at the same time, the excitement that's going on in industry, where if you're lucky, you get right done with your PhD or your postdoc, and you can have an exciting career in that aspect as well. So I try to let the student grow, see what's around, and then reconnect every couple of days or a month or a year. What do you think you want to do now, and how can we best get there? How can we open up doors in whatever aspect you'd like to go? So it's keeping connections for me, not just in the academic community, but also in the community of industry, of consultants. There are a lot of important jobs. Some of our students have become patent lawyers because a PhD is often required these days to think about scientific patents. So there's a huge variety of jobs available if you let yourself think that way and open the doors.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I was, of course, within this particular webinar, we're talking with Marie Curie fellows. So you've already made it through this process, and you're already been pre-selected. You've already won these very prestigious awards. I think at the PhD level, that's where the more difficult conversations will tend to occur, where you might feel perhaps that the student is not quite ready. And then it is a question of conversations and suggesting alternative options for them. I'm not trying to push people into things which they're going to be uncomfortable to do. What I would say, though, my discipline is somewhat curiously, at the moment, it's an area where a lot of people want to recruit into. So we're probably at a curious and very unusual stage in the field. We're actually training fewer PhDs than there are opportunities to go into. So at the moment, there's a big demand for people with the skill sets we have. And so most of them are actually going on into academia at the moment. But that will change, I think.
Yeah, well, we see it a lot among our alumni that even, after the Marie Curie, many people actually choose to go other way. Yeah. And it's important that they feel supported in that.
Oh, completely.
Yes, I was just going to say, we should make sure that everybody feels that whatever their choice is, there are potential good opportunities. It's not like a Marie Curie fellow should feel that if they ultimately don't wind up with an academic position, that's not good. There are lots of exciting things that can be done out there. And as one proceeds in their professional career, I think all the windows and doors should be open and take whatever is the most exciting thing at the time. Don't be pigeonholed into thinking you have to proceed along a certain pathway.
We have a
Sorry,
question.
I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. I just want to say that we have a question from the audience, from Swapnil. I will unmute. Can I unmute? No, I cannot unmute him. Why? Self-muted. So please ask question in the chat, okay? So he will write the question, hopefully. And we'll continue then. Going back to the main line of our discussion, when you get people into your team, because I understand the idea of the lab, right? Hopefully, because I work in social science where we work in teams. So this is a different let's say, environment. How do you align expectations? What you expect from the mentee and what the mentee might expect from you? I understand that there is a lot of communication going on. How do you manage these expectations as well?
Yes, that's not an easy question. In terms of expectations, of course, the main thing right at the beginning is communication. I try to hear the postdoc or graduate student out what do they hope to gain. Of course, they have choices of lots of different labs that they could join, hopefully. And I try to explain the kinds of things that we're doing right now that might be of interest to them. My own expectation of them is that they're excited about what they're doing, and that they be very communicative and collaborative within our lab environment. I know of some groups that have had the reputation where each individual almost keeps to themselves and tries to keep their scientific discoveries to themselves. But that is just not the way our expectations are, that we would like every person in the lab to be able to help every other person. I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're asking about, but in terms of expectation, I think one of the most important expectations in our lab is that people feel comfortable enough with each other that they can ask questions, reveal every new aspect of what they've discovered in the lab, not just to me, but to their colleagues, and feel comfortable about sharing their ideas and helping others and having others help themselves. So I think that's one of the most important expectations that I have for people joining the lab. And I try to get a sense in talking to a person when they come by to first join, if they are that kind of person. It's more the personal communication with them that reveals that to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, in my case, actually, I have no expectations. What I generally tell them is I see my role as being there to support them and to try and essentially smooth over any bumps in their particular period of time in the lab. What I try and do is say, if you're going to be successful in our discipline, you have to be able to work yourself, you have to be able to self-motivate. And if you can't do that, I'm not going to push you, because ultimately you're not going to succeed. So my feeling is I try and hire exciting people into the lab and then give them the space to be themselves. And where I see my role intervening is if they are then having problems, which tends to be, say, with administration or access to infrastructure. And just like Al, I mean, I am one that does not believe in secrecy. I do not believe in the idea of the individual. I believe very much that everyone in the lab should be collaborating, should be talking, should be sharing ideas. And I give examples of my own where I thought I had a very, very smart idea. I was secretly nurturing it, and I can't keep ideas to myself. And I mentioned it to a colleague, and they said, yes, we'd already had that idea 5 years ago. It doesn't work. And they explained to me in great detail why this idea doesn't work. So my thought is it's better to have more ideas and share them, because you'll find out where the weak ideas are, than to keep ideas to yourself and keep secretive. And I just don't like working in that kind of environment anyway.
Thank you. I want to say that we have a question from the audience now. I think this is a follow-up questions in a way. I'm not, I will read it. Swapnil Sangmuk asks, how can we use mentoring in a collaborative way? I mean, can we use our expertise in research for collaboration through mentoring? This is a complicated question. Should I repeat it?
Yes.
Can we use our expertise in research for collaboration through mentoring. I'm not sure if Swapnil wants to unmute themselves, then they can maybe clarify this question, because they are self-muted. Oh, they are self-muted, so this will not happen now, but we can think about this question and then ask this later on. So I have still two questions that are, I think, really important, especially the one that I wanted to ask now. How do you deal with a disruptive event in the life of your mentee? I heard once, because I went to a training once, so I heard once that a supervisor should get involved but not invested. Is it the same for a mentor, you think?
I guess mentoring styles differ greatly because people are very different from one another. And in addition, of course, everybody in our lab has their own distinct personality. I just try to make sure I, as best I can, understand what's happening in the life of any individual that's in our lab, to understand if something is going wrong, how can I help? And as I think you kind of suggested with your question, we're not the only individuals that may be able to help a person in the lab. So depending on the type of problem that an individual in our lab may help, certainly the mentor can play an important role, but there may, depending on the type of personal issue that may come about, there may be other avenues and other places that the individual should go to get a wide variety of things.
Can you give us an example?
Well, there may be a very difficult personal situation that's come about, and to some extent the mentor can, if you know the person, the student or postdoc very well, you can try to do your best to help guide them, but at the same time, the problem that occurs might require medical guidance or intervention in ways that transcend what the mentor can do or should do. So it should be very clear to everyone in the environment the different avenues that a person can go to and take advantage of if there are very distinct personal issues. If the issue revolves around what's going on in the lab, certainly the mentor is in the position to help the most, but there can be very wide variety of difficult personal interactions and problems that occur in anyone's life where the mentor can be some help, but certainly family and medical advice might be extremely important as well.
So I will ask a follow-up question after Professor Collins.
Yeah, so for me, what I generally try and do myself, and then suggest that other people do, is try and put themselves in the shoes of the other person if it's a conflict between individuals, and try and understand why the other person has the viewpoint that they do. And the last example I can recount, which I think is quite a common problem, is a situation in which a more senior person in the lab was frustrated that they felt the more junior person in the lab was not very tidy and was not doing very careful work and was therefore causing disruption. The junior person in the lab was feeling the senior person in the lab was being disrespectful and not understanding their training needs and their demands. And so in that example, I got the information from both sides. And then what I did, and I can't remember this because I'd taken my wife out for a hotel, we rarely go out together, and we're taking her for dinner, and I actually said, we'll set up a conference call where the three of us were on the phone. I got them each to explain and we were also on the phone, so somewhat anonymous, to each other, them to explain to us what the problem they felt was there, with me as the mediator in the middle. And we did that within 3 hours of the issue blowing up, and we were able to resolve it very quickly. And I think that was an example where they both said afterwards it was helpful because it actually managed to calm down quite quickly. The situation would have been quite difficult. So I think for me, the thing is, try and, when you're frustrated and when you're upset, try and understand how it might be perceived from this other standpoint, and that can be quite useful.
Yeah, thank you very much. I may have misunderstood certain aspects of the question, and if it was focusing on interpersonal disruption within the lab, I totally agree that things you just said are extraordinarily important.
No, for me, both answers were actually excellent because they tackled the issue from both sides. I'm always interested in the psychological and emotional impact that dealing with students or postdocs that are under your supervision or who have trust in you may have on you. And then how you deal with that, not to get overwhelmed, you know, because when you work with 20 people and I don't know, 5 of them have issues, this might be too much. So my question was also about a concrete experience, how you dealt yourself with you, in a way, with your emotions and what you did to help a student or a postdoc in a difficult situation. So I don't know if you have any example to share, like the concrete one.
Yeah, I'm thinking. Maybe I'll pass to my colleague just in case he has additional.
Yeah. I mean, I deal with, you know, so students who have a range of different issues. Often very smart people have a lot of other challenging issues, and what I try and do is speak to them as a colleague and friend, but also warn them that I'm not trained to deal with challenging issues. What I would say is that my wife would complain and tell you that my academic family is more important than my own family. And essentially, to my mind, they're both equally important, and I care a lot about both of them. So when I start to go into a relationship with researchers, I do see them in a way, sort of in the same way I am in loco parentis in a way when I started as a PhD student. So I have that kind of parental role, and I do care about these people a lot, which is why I mentioned previously, if I feel that one career path is not right for them, I'd like to try and steer them to a path which is more appropriate for them. I would say that there is a critical size at which you simply can't deal with this many people. And so what I've tried to do is always keep my group small enough that I can see everyone as an individual and speak to everyone, as often as possible on a one-to-one basis, just how is their life going? But I'm also conscious that they have their own lives, I have my own life, and you can't get too intimate with everybody. You just have to sort of keep that degree of professional separation, but have the empathy to understand why they're going through difficult times, to give them space. And as I mentioned previously, as a mentor, I feel my role is to smooth out the bumps in the road, give them the opportunity to shine, give them the space in which to explore their own intellectual world. And if at the end of that time, they don't really achieve because they're not sufficiently motivated or not sufficiently driven, and then to encourage them to go and work in a different direction.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think, in a sense, our conversation here is boiling down once again to the difference between a mentor and a supervisor, and yeah. I think this particular question really revolves around the mentor, not just the details of an experiment that was finished in the lab, but are you able to know the people in your lab well enough so that you can sit down and have a discussion about what's going on in a person's life, and not just the science and engineering of what's going on. To what extent can your lab be small enough, just as you said? And I totally agree. If you have a huge lab where you don't see people very much, it's not much fun. So we've always tried to have a small lab here as well, because it's no fun for me if I am not able to meet the people in the lab every day, and sit down and have pizza with them or something, and really talk about things other than, in addition to, what's going on in the lab.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. I think that I really enjoy, I mean, basically when I try and select people for my lab, they're people that I like and I'm inspired by. I mean, these are people I care about. But I would say that on the other side, I know nothing about the details of their private lives unless they bring them to me. So I always am the last to hear about people getting married or anything. I mean, our conversations tend to be around, their mood and their motivation much more than, who's boyfriend or whatever. But I mean, I think that, yeah, for me, these are people I care about a lot. I care about their careers, and I enjoy conversing with them. So I want to spend enough time talking to them to find out that they're happy. And I also do, of course, get very distressed when things are going wrong with their projects and they're getting demotivated and dispirited.
Thank you. I think we covered a lot of ground here. Very important. We are all interested in the mental health of everybody now. So that is an important topic for all of us. Okay, and my last question is about the diversity, because we would like to know how you promote diversity and inclusion in your lab or in your team.
Yes. So yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking with Christina, our Marie Curie fellow, about this, and the word diversity right now on our campus is used in some very specific ways. The word itself can be very general, but people in our academic departments here are extraordinarily concerned about diversity right now from the point of view of gender diversity, racial underrepresented minorities and whatnot. And do you have a diverse group in your own lab, but more generally now in our departments. So each department is very, very cognizant and worried, I would say, about whether there is sufficient diversity in their lab, or I'm sorry, in their academic department. In our own lab, especially when you have a small lab, diversity can take on different aspects. We've had times when in our own lab, in terms of gender, I would say at the beginning, several decades ago, mostly men. In fact, when I was an undergraduate at MIT, 6% of MIT was women. So you can imagine diversity took on a very different meaning then. Right now in our own laboratory, almost everyone in our lab is female. It just turns out. They're outside of myself and a male staff, senior research staff person. And I'm not, this is nothing that I have specifically tried to do or not to do. I almost think it's a result of when people come to the lab to interview, do they think the lab is a comfortable place for them, for their environment? And to me, the issue of diversity is to try to make sure in general that there is enough diversity so that anybody who might be interested in the science and engineering of what you're doing can feel comfortable personally and confident that they can think about what they aspire to do and not worry about a lack of diversity affecting their own ability to move forward.
This is very interesting for me as a social scientist, to hear about the women in the engineering lab, that they are a majority actually. That's a change, and I'm thinking, why? What is happening? I need to do a research on this. You know, this.
Right.
Where did the men go? To AI or IT more? You know, just.
Well, yeah. Let's. I wouldn't want to generalize. I'm just one of many labs in a single department. There are 8 engineering departments, and for sure, there are still a lot more men than women in engineering. But in any individual lab, I think things kind of cycle, and that's where we are right now in our own lab. In our department of biological engineering, there's always a concern of making sure when you're looking for new faculty members, have you tried your best to search widely for underrepresented minorities, women, and other people, to make sure that everybody has an opportunity, so that diversity can take on a lot more meaning tomorrow than it did a decade ago.
Thank you. Professor Collins.
Yeah, in both the institutes I work for, I mean, diversity is in taken extremely seriously, and we do things like at lectureship level have specifically gendered shortlists, for instance. What I would say in terms of the recruitment into my lab, I don't think I have been particularly cognizant in a way of diversity. I've tended to recruit the best people I feel that would work in the lab, and that has actually led to quite a diverse lab, but that is more by accident than design. I think the one thing that I have tried to do, and I'm very conscious of this both in the recruitments that I make and the panels I sit on, is to really search very hard for the inherent bias that I have in terms of the way, for instance, I might perceive the way a CV is written or a cover letter is written, and trying to make sure that I actually am conscious that, for instance, the way that women and men tend to write is differently, people from different cultures write differently, and have I actually seen that? But for me, and it's like with Al, I mean, the thing that really swings it for me is to actually get people into my lab, to meet other people in the lab. And so, for instance, with all my recent PhD recruitments, all technical recruitments, after the phase of interviews, we've actually flown people over, spent a few days working with us to work out whether they would actually fit in the environment in which I'm working and my team are working. And I don't know if that's, that's why it's a relatively diverse group. I say I don't think it's intentional. I think it's by accident. But I'm very conscious at the higher levels, we are definitely trying to make sure that we try and become more diverse. I would say that despite that, what I really do notice in both of my institutions, if we look at the question of gender, which is the simplest one to address, despite the fact that many of our junior hires are women, there's a pyramid in which, as you go towards more and more senior levels, there are more and more men. And it's something that we are actually actively looking at within Copenhagen to work out, why has this happened? What is the problem behind it? And we haven't solved it. But gender diversity is only one of a whole rainbow of different types of diversity issues we have to address, as Al's already pointed out, and we're not really looking within archaeology, certainly more broadly than that, I would say, at the moment.
So, but the follow-up question that I have that actually struck me as a Polish visiting scholar in Canada, the diversity of students, PhD students, postdocs. How do you, on your level, in your team, establish, for example, the rules of communication to accommodate the different cultural expressions, so there are not many misunderstandings, for example, that can happen, and I have seen that quite a lot. How do you deal with that?
Well, one of the things that we try to do every week is to make sure that we all meet together as a group, so that people are not isolated but know each other quite well. I think that's part of an answer to your question. We'll sit down and have group meeting every week, and part of that, of course, is everybody giving short presentations on what they're doing in their research, so that everybody knows what everybody else is doing and feels comfortable receiving critiques and comments and suggestions. And it's not easy to have somebody critique somebody else around the table, say, you know, I don't really think you did that right. But if you know people in your group, you begin to get comfortable with that, and you look forward to it, which is a very important threshold. And of course, one way to help that is to eat food together. And so when we have group meetings, we're always eating together at the same time. And the first thing you do is eat a bunch, and then talk, and then eat some more, and then talk. Get some coffee together, get some cocktails together, whatever. Meet together as a group, and not just be isolated, and try to guess what other people are thinking about in terms of what you've done and contributed. But really have everybody feel comfortable being in the same room with everybody else, so there's no misunderstanding, or at least minimal misunderstanding. And if something does happen, then there's a clear way to try to get together and straighten that out.
Professor Collins?
Yeah, it's interesting. We don't have group meetings like Al does. We have them. We take them off. At the moment, they're not on. We're going to consider running them again. So it's an issue of how it works best, and I'm still not sure after all these years of mentoring and supervising what is the best. I tend to now talk to them individually when I'm in, and then we try and take it from there and put groups together. But going back to your point about communication, I think it's something actually I've only come to be aware of relatively late in my career, which is somewhat shameful to admit, is that because the lingua franca in our lab is English, and I'm a native English speaker, sometimes when someone whose second or third language is English is trying to express themselves, they express themselves differently, and that can be misunderstood by other people. And this is where it comes back to what I was saying. An email often, for instance, could be structured in such a way which may appear offensive, and no offense was meant. And so the mantra in our group is communication, communication, communication. And we try to talk, and usually when you talk through a problem, you can resolve these misunderstandings quite quickly. But it is an issue. I think probably Al's model is better than mine. I think the idea of eating together every week is a good one. We do tend to eat together most lunches, actually. We all tend to eat together, so we have that opportunity. But at that time, we're just talking much more about social things than we are about science.
But Matthew, I think you hit on a very important point that I've seen in communication, not just between students, but even between faculty, excuse me, and that is the difference between email and sitting down together to discuss. And yes, language can certainly be a problem with different languages, but sometimes people communicate with each other very differently by email. And without the ability to have a conversation, it's easy to have the receiver of an email come to a completely different conclusion about what that email meant than what the sender meant by it. And without follow-up back and forth conversation, that can lead to interpersonal issues that are not productive. So that's why I think it's so much nicer to have an environment where people sit down and talk with each other and don't, and of course it just depends. If you happen to be lucky and everybody has an office near each other, that helps. But if you're in different locations because of the kind of thing you do, it makes it more challenging. But I think to me, email is the kind of thing that you do, if you're off at a conference and you have to ask a question to somebody back at the lab or vice versa, that's the only thing left. But otherwise, the interpersonal relationship of talking to each other is so important.
Thank you. So my list of questions has been totally emptied here, exhausted. But we have the questions from the audience, and I will take some if you allow. So first question that I wanted to address. Can you give some advice to a young faculty who just started their careers, how to transfer their roles from a student to a supervisor? And this is Xiao Wu who is asking this.
I'll take a stab first. I barely remember it because it was about 100 years ago, but but I do remember. You know, one of the first things when I joined the faculty, and again in my own particular case, back in the decades when I was finishing my PhD, engineers really did not do postdocs, and so roughly at age 27 or so, I became a faculty member. And the first thing I realized is that everybody around the room looked the same age as me, and so, you know, what am I doing? Well, all of a sudden I'm supposed to be a faculty member, but some cases I look younger than the students in the same room. So the transition was not at all easy. And trying to think back, you know, how do you assume the role of a mentor when you feel like, wow, just last week I was a student. What's the big difference? And so it took a while for that for me to get over that. And perhaps a few decades later, I feel more comfortable in that. But the transition was not trivial. So I really sympathize with the person who asked that question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I talk to my former students that go on to faculty positions, and I warn them about what I call the first PhD problem. Namely, that the very first student that you mentor, you want to make sure that there is sufficient distance between the work that you're interested in doing and the work you're getting your student to do, because I have seen too often actually those individuals fall out because the work that's being done ultimately becomes no longer the work of the supervisor but the student, and yet because the supervisor is so junior, it feels that part of their world is being taken away from them. So I think that's quite a challenge. And for me, what I would say is that it is a really difficult, I mean, I was lucky or unlucky enough not to get a job for a long time. I did many postdocs. So I had that experience. But it was a real challenge to suddenly have that responsibility for a younger researcher's career. And I don't think I did a very good job with my first few PhD students. And I think it is something where you do need a lot of support from senior colleagues. And I think the best thing to do, to be honest, when you are a new member of faculty, is to be a co-supervisor on a more senior colleague's projects, rather than being thrust into the position, which I was, as far as Al and I both were, of supervising and being a mentor very early in your career.
Thank you. Another question comes from Abdel, who asks, this is a difficult one, I think. I mean, a touchy one. How do you manage the generational gap between the mentor and the mentee? My host supervisor is literally half a century older than me. He's the smartest and the sweetest person I know, but he resists new methodologies.
Well, in a way,
this is the expectations, you know, from the both sides. So what do you do when you have a case like this as a mentor?
It does kind of overlap a tiny bit with the previous question, and as I mentioned, when so let's see, I've been on the faculty for about 45 years now, 46 years, and it certainly did feel differently at the beginning than it does now. But you know, if it gets to the point where I think like I'm half a century away, wow, that's the time to think about taking up my viola and doing string quartets again. But But you know, I think it depends on how comfortable you are talking with people and being a person, and not worrying about the fact that you might be older or even significantly older, but can you still relate to the challenges of what a younger person is facing in trying to start their career, do a postdoc, establish what they're doing. How close are you to be able to relate to the situation they're in? Right now, I still feel I'm able to do that, so I'm still loving what I'm doing in that regard. But I can imagine another 20 or 30 years. Oops.
Yeah, for me, it's a great question, actually. And I see it, particularly in the groups that run very top down. As I've tried to explain, we try to run bottom up and give everyone a voice. And that's because in our field, the technology is moving so quickly that the skills and methods that I learned as a postdoc are basically irrelevant today. So, I mean, the technology is so very different. There's a couple of things I would say is, one, I love to ask questions because that helps me learn. I also tell my students that at least half of what I tell them will be wrong is for them to work out which half. So, and I think what's great about the sort of the UK and American systems is we really like people to challenge us. We are thrilled by people that disagree with us and argue their case. And I think that's very important. So what I would say is a good mentor will listen to argument and will accept when they are wrong. And the older you get, the more out of touch you may be with the latest technologies, there's a greater risk you may be wrong. And it's to accept gracefully that you were wrong and they were right.
Well, I hope this will help our listener in his discussions. There is hope. So,
right.
Another question from Katerina. Training was mentioned. I wonder, how important do you feel it is to have institutional support and training for mentoring?
Oh, I was waiting to understand the question till the very last word. So training to be a mentor is the question. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't feel that I had much of any training to be a mentor specifically. That is, coming originally from an electrical engineering department, which happened to be the largest department on campus. At MIT, there were about 1,000 faculty altogether. In electrical engineering, there's always been about 125 faculty, even though there are 25 or so departments. So in a sense, we're thrown into a room with 125 other people, and you try to establish relations with people there so that they can help you individually. I don't remember at that time ever finding a situation where there was a departmentally organized training to be a mentor. But as I mentioned right at the beginning, I was extraordinarily fortunate to have a mentor myself, starting from my sophomore year in college right through my graduate career, who became my faculty colleague when I started as a member of the faculty as well. He tragically passed away from cancer at age 51, but I was fortunate to be able to work almost alongside him. We work on totally different things, but we were in the same department for quite a few years. And he and my close teaching colleagues, and that hasn't come up yet, but for those of us who have to teach courses every term, that's a totally different mentorship situation where you need mentors to help you learn how to teach. That's something I think that's done very well. So I should kind of backtrack on what I said. From the point of view of supervising students, I don't think at that time we had a setup, but from the point of view of teaching, there is a very close relationship to help new teachers learn how to teach.
Thank you, Professor Collins.
Yeah, I'm being slightly diverted by the fact that the students contact me who wants to see me. I don't know how much longer we're going to go on.
Okay.
Yeah, I also didn't get any mentoring training. I mean, we did have very useful training in how students learn, so the psychology of learning. And that was something because I did notice that my lecturers didn't seem to have had any education in how to actually teach. But in terms of mentoring, no, it's something that, you know, you kind of, one hopes one has good mentors and one copies, and I say I had a great mentor, and you copy what is good from what they do, and then you try to not do. Oh, I tell you, one of the great ways I have tried to mentor my students is my wife had a terrible mentor, and basically I tried to do everything that that person did not do. So literally, she'd come home and tell me stories about the way things were going in the lab, and I said, right, that's a great way to not do it myself. It's probably a very unfair thing to say, but yeah. But so, I didn't get training either, and I think it's probably very sensible to get training.
Yeah, this is actually what we think it's lacking at the institutions still. I don't know if you can still go for another 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to miss my train, but I will go on.
Oh, thank you. So because we have a lot of questions, but I will ask only 2. Okay.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I'll stay for 15 minutes. I'll tell her to wait.
On the topic of mentoring versus supervising, do you consciously make the decision, I'm going to mentor this person instead of just supervise them? Or mentoring is something that you naturally default to with everyone in your lab? And this is from Esther, the question.
Yeah, I don't try to prejudge the situation whether or not to be a mentor or a supervisor. Usually, the door to my office is open. It looks closed right now because I knew we were on this webinar, but we have I have an open door policy, and when somebody wants to speak to me about their work or anything, they just knock on the door or just come right in. And the conversation begins, and it becomes clear very quickly whether there's a specific question on an experiment that just got finished, or whether there's a question on, hey, have you gone to this show downtown? It's really interesting, and how come you're in your office? Why don't you go out to this show? So I think, you know, you hope to have an atmosphere where people can establish right away when they come in your office what they want to talk about. And absolutely, if they want to talk about the experiment that just got finished, I am thrilled to be able to do that. But at the same time, we kind of let the conversation roll.
Yeah. I would say the situation often blurs. I mean, there's a clear role for supervision, which tends to be around the mechanics of doing experiments and the approaches to analyze and interpret the data. But I mean, I can think of so many occasions in which the ostensible meeting to discuss an experimental data will actually then bleed from supervision into mentorship, because something will come up in discussion and something will be highlighted when you realize actually this has got less to do with the way the student's feeling about the data and far more to do about maybe the way they want to shape the next stage of the work. And that will then usually, I say, let's just go for coffee. And so that will split between being in the office staring at data to going, so like Al, I have a caffeine addiction, and we'll just hop up and I'll be back in the coffee room drinking coffee. And then that conversation will often lead from the data into a broader question, and then often back to the data again.
Thank you. So another question, and I think that this is a question from Christina, but I will add a layer to it. How do you find a mentor? Do you ask someone to be a mentor, or do they just become one? And my question here is, we were talking also a lot about you mentoring your people, your students. Do you then are also open to others who are not under your supervision? Can they come? How does it work?
Yeah, and I guess for sure that happens, and it also might depend on specific issues about how your department and institution is run as well. So it used to be, for about 10 years, I was the head of the graduate program in my department, and as such, not only my own graduate students, but any graduate students in the department that had a question that might come up would come and see me, and these might be the whole range of things that you have raised over the past hour and 15 minutes of interpersonal interactions, interpersonal problems, disruption, or questions about how to get along with their own supervisor in terms of research. So these kinds of things can come about if you happen to have a position like that where you're expected to be able to mentor, I wouldn't say supervise because it's not necessarily a research thing, but mentor students outside your own group. And this is very common in any academic department. There are people who are in those positions that they have to do that. And it can be very important because I think any student at any level, whether it's undergrad, grad, or postdoc, needs more than one person to be their go-to person. You can't just rely on one person. You really need other opinions, especially if the problems are getting significant.
Thank you, Professor Collins.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do. I think I mentor my academic family, but I also end up sharing advice, whether it's useful, with other students. I'm kind of conscious with other students so that they have obviously a direct line of communication with the supervisor. I don't really want to get in the way of that. But actually, curiously, I think most of my conversations about sort of strategy and career actually tend to be with junior faculty. So I'm not an official mentor. I have been to a few, but an unofficial mentor to many, mainly because of my position in the coffee room, perhaps. But I've ended up certainly talking to and advising a number of my junior faculty colleagues about some of the issues they've had. But really, in terms of the efforts I put into mentoring, I mentioned to you previously, the time I take not to be reactive to someone talking to me, but to be proactive, and with just an opening gambit of conversation about how are things going, what's happening at the moment. That's something I kind of really do more respect to my academic family, because really I don't have the time beyond them, I think, to be a good mentor.
Thank you. So we have now the closing question about specifically Marie Curie Fellows. So I'm reading. Marie Curie Fellowship involves researchers coming from different parts of Europe to the US and vice versa as well. What are the biggest challenges for a European researchers that joins a US university, in your opinion? This is for, I guess, Professor Grodzinsky, but maybe Professor Collins also could answer that one. Or for Professor Collins, the other way around, if you have had this experience.
I have.
So do you have specific mentoring strategies to overcome these challenges for these people crossing the Atlantic?
Yeah, let me suggest that Matthew chime right in, since he has had that experience. Yeah, well, so for me, and this comes back to, we've already mentioned this issue about cultures and, for instance, the way that emails are being written. And one of the things that I have noticed is it's not just from Europe to America, but it's from different academic cultures within Europe to other academic cultures within Europe. And I think that, say, the Netherlands, where I've also worked, America and the UK are all quite similar, in which we really enjoy the fact that people are challenging us all the time, and that we are not seen as some kind of the owners of knowledge, and that we are flawed, and therefore they are looking to sort of open our eyes to some of the weaknesses in our thinking. And one of the challenges I have is when I have people coming from other parts of Europe who are much more used to the idea that a professor will give out information and that will then be adopted by students, that I have to sort of to encourage them to understand that I'm a very flawed character, and that they should, as I say, only realize that 50% perhaps or even less of what I tell them is correct. So I think that's the difference. I think it's actually the culture in most of my experience of the US and the UK, as I say, the Netherlands, it's about the flawed professor, the person that is successful, but it can be challenged and will seek and enjoy the challenge, and will seek and enjoy being made to look small and arguing their position again. Whereas in other parts of Europe and certainly in other parts of the world, that can be quite challenging. And so I have found it often difficult, particularly I'd say with people from Oriental Asia, actually, to get them to sort of accept that I may be wrong.
So this actually ties to another question asked, so I hope that the person got the answer as well. When we are talking about the mentees that are not so open also to critique, right?
Yeah.
So these are okay.
In our situation, of course, we do get a lot of international postdocs and graduate students, and so there is a constant stream of multicultural activity going on. But in particular for the Marie Curie, I've enjoyed greatly interacting with Christina Fourier, who is our current Marie Curie, and where we first learned that in her home country of Romania, my mother's father is also from Romania, from Iași, Romania. So it just so happens I'm from all over different parts of Europe. The name is actually Russian, but you never could tell where the border between Russia and Poland was back in those days. So, but then the Austro-Hungarian Empire was another part of the heritage. So I have greatly enjoyed interacting with our international visitors. And from the Marie Curie side, I think the most important thing, again, for me, is always to sit down and talk and try to learn first what our Marie Curie postdoc would like to achieve. What does she hope to get out of the situation? How can I help and participate? And I've just found it tremendous fun to be able to do that.
Thank you. I have still questions, but we are running out of time. So I'm sorry, I tried to answer at least one per person. I hope I was right, and I didn't miss too much. Thank you to our panelists. Enjoy the rest of your day. This will be recorded, so it will be available on our MSCAA website for anybody who wants to listen, and for the future generations, because as we know, internet is forever.
Right.
So thank you once again. I'm clapping. I don't know if the others can. I don't think so, but we are clapping.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this. It's been lots of fun and very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Can I echo what Alice just said? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll meet again in other circumstances. We never know. Right? Now I will try to close this. This will be also fun. Okay. I will just close it, I think. I will close you. I don't know. I will mute you. We'll mute you. Bye. Okay.